acknowledge that we were founded on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Attawandaronk, the Mississauga and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and now live on land that is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We have many representatives working across this land now known as Ontario, and we acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory. We are grateful to be able to work and live on this land, and thankful to the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people who have cared for these territories since time immemorial, and who continue to contribute to the strength of Ontario and to all communities across the province. To continue to center reconciliation, we encourage our team, partners, students, and teachers to take time to learn about the lands they are currently on. Visit native-land.ca for more information.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our virtual field trip of an onion and herb farm. My name is Rachel, and I'm your host from Farm and Food Care Ontario. We're thrilled to be joining our friends at Agscape this week to celebrate Local Food Week. Local Food Week is a celebration of the bounty of fresh, healthy food grown, produced, and processed right here in Ontario. So I'm very excited today to be taking you to visit an onion and a herb farm where we're going to be learning all about growing and harvesting some of these yummy crops. We would love to see where all of you are tuning into today. So put it in the chat. And feel free to upload photos to your teacher dashboard or even tag Agscape or Farm and Food Care on social media. If you have any questions for the host throughout the tour, you can put them in the chat for them to be answered. All right, let's get right to it. This is Nikki. Nikki, why don't you take it over from here and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Nikki Scott. I am a fourth-generation farmer in the Flamborough area. We grow potatoes, onions, and herbs. Today, we're going to focus a little bit more on the herbs and onions. It's a beautiful day out here, so you might see me flip my glasses down because it's a little sunny for me to be standing out here. So a little bit about us. Fourth generation, myself and my brothers run the farm. Potatoes have always been our main crop, but we've always had supplement crops. So herbs is relatively new to us. It's been about maybe 10 years that we've been doing herbs. Onions is probably around the 8-year mark. So we've been learning constantly with them because we've never had experience. So every year we learn a little bit more about each crop, which is great. Today, I'm going to just turn my camera around here and show you some herb farms. Hang on, give me 1 second. Let me figure out how to do this again. Here we go. Where did I go? Settings, camera. Now we're going to use my other camera here. Does anybody see that? It doesn't look like my camera's working very well. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so this is our herb fields. Rachel, I'm not seeing myself anymore.
Yep, we can still see you.
Okay, because I can't see anything on my screen. So bear with me and hopefully everything goes well. So here, I'll show you a little bit closer here. So this is cilantro. This is growing crop cilantro. A lot of cilantro is used in Mexican and Latin cuisine. Lots of it's used in salsas. We grow about, I'd say about 30 acres to 40 acres of this in a year. This particular one that you're looking at, we planted in early May. So it's not quite ready for harvest yet. It's probably got another week or two to it before we start to harvest that crop. and it's all harvested by hand. So we have many workers that go out into the field. We have a tractor that drives down the field. As you can see here, if I back up a little bit, you can see how the rows, there's kind of 4 grouped together and a little bit bigger spacing between the next set of rows. That's for the tractors to be able to drive down the rows so that they can, when they plant them and when they go to harvest. So there's a tractor that drives down the row, and there's some blades underneath of it that go and dig underneath the roots of the cilantro. All it does is make it loose. So it just loosens up the ground, and then the workers will come by and grab it by hand and actually pull it out with the roots still on. And then after they pull it out, they put it into bins, and then we take the bins back to our farm and we put ties on them and send them to our retailers or to our wholesalers, who will send them to major grocery chains. So similar to cilantro is this crop over here, which is dill. It looks slightly different. It is planted and harvested in a very similar way. It's very fragrant. Both cilantro and dill are. This is actually the property that my house is on, so my house smells glorious all the time. You can also see here, we've got a couple of yellow flags in the field. That helps us distinguish what the crop is when it's planted and it hasn't grown up through the ground yet, and you don't really know what's there. So we write on it what crop it is, and the date that it was planted, how many acres it was, and the lot. So that's really important to us to know the lot. So when we harvest, we'll harvest small amounts at a time. And when we harvest them, we need to know where that crop came from. So if there was ever an issue with that crop, or somebody happened to get sick, unfortunately, or there was ever an issue, we can trace that backwards. So if the store came to us and said, hey, we got a product from you on this date, we'd be able to look at our records and say, okay, it was from this field, and we put this type of seed into it. These were the people that worked in that field. This is when it was harvested. This is when it was packed. And we can follow it all the way through, right from planting all the way through to harvest and to the storefront. I'm going to walk down the field here a little bit further. We have another crop down here a little bit called fenugreek, or sometimes referred to as methy leaf. It is used a lot in Indian food, is my understanding. To be honest, I've never used it in anything. I don't really know what it's used for or how anybody does use it. We do grow some, not a lot. Right now, it's very small. And it's just coming through the ground. If I didn't know any better, I think it was weeds until it starts to come through the ground. It grows up pretty tall, and it kind of gets a purpley color to the leaf. It's very pretty when it grows. So all of these were grown at different stages, or planted at different stages. So I'll walk down a little bit further here. So this is dill as well. And again, very small, hard to see as it comes through the ground. This particular lot was planted on the 16th of May. So between this dill and the dill that I just showed you, there's only a week between the two of them from when they were planted to how they're growing. So they grow relatively fast. Most of our herbs are planted, and they have about a 30 to 45 day window on the crop itself. So when we, it all kind of depends on the weather as well. Obviously, many farmers deal with weather issues, but we will irrigate if we need to. Actually, might be able, if I turn around here. I'm going to try and change my cameras around again. I've got another field behind me that has herbs in it as well that was just recently planted. And the guys here are actually setting up some irrigation. So there we've got a big tractor, two workers, and the long arms that go out. So that's a boom type irrigation that we use. We have many different styles of irrigation. So when I show you some onions, we use some sprinklers in onions, and we also use what we call drip tape, which is it's exactly that. It looks like a piece of tape that's running through the field between the rows, and it has tiny pinholes in it that allows the water to go directly to the roots of the plant. Then we have this boom type sprayer. We have sprinklers that will also set up in the fields and irrigate. And then we also have what is referred to as a gun. So it's really, really huge. It puts out a lot of water very quickly. So you have to use it on crops that are a little bit more sturdy. Herbs are very delicate and can be broken and damaged very easily. So we use the boom irrigations if necessary, drip tape, sprinklers if absolutely required. We try and keep those to onions. And then the guns we try and use on potatoes. Should I flip to the, maybe I'll flip to onions now, unless there's any questions and anybody wants to know specifically about herbs.
We do have some questions that have come in about the herbs.
Sure.
So I can pop those up for you and you can let me know if you can see them.
Perfect. How do you start growing the herbs? Oh, that's an excellent question. So they come in tiny, tiny, tiny little seeds. So we have a large planter that you put lots of seeds in. They almost look like little buckets. In the video of the onions, it'll be very similar process, and I can show you when we go through the onions kind of what that looks like. So each one of those little plants that I was showing you comes from a seed. So there is thousands and thousands and thousands of seeds in this field that have grown each of these plants individually. Why do you harvest, or why do you harvest by hand instead of using a machine? Oh, that's also a good question. So many years ago, when we first started herbs, we tried to use machines. And the machines are not very delicate. So the hardest thing with herbs is that they're so fragile. So when you pull them out of the ground, if you bend them the wrong way or break them, put too much pressure on them, it actually damages the plant and makes them go bad faster. So we had actually an engineer. We had hired an engineer to try and create a machine for us to harvest our herbs. And another issue that we have is there's not a lot of things that like sprays that we can put on our crops to control weeds. So as weeds come through, and you may see some of them in a field here, it's relatively clean right now, but the only way that we can control weeds is to work the ground around the crop rather than spraying anything, because there's government regulations on what you're allowed to put on food. And for herbs, there's not a lot that we can use. So when we harvest with machines, if there's any weeds in the crop, then it gets pulled at the same time. So I'll show you here. Try and switch this around again. So here you can see that there's a weed in the middle of that row. And if we were to machine harvest it, it would collect that weed at the same time, which is not edible. So we can't put that in our crop. So that's another reason. So multiple reasons, but yes, it is definitely very labor intensive, but it's the best way to give you guys the best quality possible. Oh, what is my favorite herb? Okay. You know what? I used to really, really, really hate cilantro. It was not a favorite of mine. I didn't like the smell of it, and there's a lot of people that either love or hate it. I will absolutely love cilantro now, and same with dill. Fresh herbs are fantastic. Dill's fantastic in potatoes. Fresh cilantro I put on my store-bought in salsa, or if I make my own salsa. So I really like both of those. Again, I'm not sure how to use fenugreek. I haven't figured it out yet. Once I do, I would let you know. And I'm sure that'd become a favorite of mine as well. why are some of the rows flat and some have hills? Okay, so where we were just looking, when we plant, we make what we call a bed. So the bed is where the wider rows, where the tractor tires can go. So as the tractor drives down the field, you don't want it too close to the crop because it'll crush the herbs. So we make what we call a bed, and in that bed we'll plant 4 rows of whatever the crop is that we're planting, so that you have 4 that actually go underneath the tractor, between the tractor tires, and then there's a couple of rows on the outside that will get harvested as well at the same time. And that's actually by design as well, because there's many different tractors that go through. So you have a tractor that plants the field, you'll have a tractor that comes and works the ground. Sometimes you'll have a tractor spray the crop if you need to. You have a tractor that comes through and harvests the crop, and all of them have slightly different tires on them. And each tractor is a slightly different make, brand, model. So we have to make sure that we leave enough space for each tractor to be able to get in the field without damaging the crop.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Nikki. So because Nikki's onion field and her herb fields are a little far apart, she's filmed a little video to show us what planting onions look like, what they're looking like right now, and what they'll look like when they're ready to be harvested. So Nikki's going to talk over the video, and then if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we'll answer them right after the video.
Okay, so we plant onions in 2 different ways. We have a plant called transplanting, and then we have direct seeding. So this is a picture of them transplanting the onions. That's how the onions come to us for transplant. So each of those trays have a couple thousand onion plants in them. And then we take those onion plants and put them in the ground. So they're relatively small when we get them. And this is the machine that they use. So there's people that work on the back of it. They pull each of those individual plants out, drop them into the little hole of the machine, and then the machine digs a hole in the ground and plants the onion. And as you can see, it goes relatively quick. The guy's hands have to work fast. So there's people that walk behind and will put in plants if necessary. This is direct seeded. So that there's rolls on the top of the machine that put our drip tape in. And then those are the little buckets. You can see the little green dots inside. Those are individual seeds. Those individual seeds get dropped down into the ground. So here, as you can see, the machine's digging kind of a rut. And if you look off to the sides there, you can see them a little bit better. There's green dots that are falling down into the ground. That is onion seeds. And they drop very, very quickly. So this is when they first plant it. And you can see the black cable there. That is the irrigation lines, the drip tape. So it gets put down at the same time as we plant the onions. And there's some workers that stand behind the machine. They make sure it gets covered up with dirt to make sure that we have it all out there. This is what our current fields look like. So the really, really tiny ones are the direct seeded. So that's planted from a seed. And then the ones there on the right-hand side of the video are transplanted onions. So they're up a little bit higher, a little bit more sturdy, a little bit bigger. You can see some pipes through the field. That's an irrigation system that has our sprinklers attached to them. So we put that on the onions that are a little bit bigger because they can withstand a little bit more of the pressure of the rain or the water falling down on the onions. So those onions we've planted now, we won't harvest them until August. So this is a transplant onion. I'm picking it out of the ground here. And as you can see, it's a little bit difficult to get out of the ground because the root system on it is already established quite well. So as I pull it out there, you can see how long those roots are. And then there's a tiny little bulb starting on the end of the onion already. And that's what's going to grow into the big onion that you guys would normally eat. So at that stage, there's about 4 leaves on it, which makes it a little bit sturdier than this one. This one is a direct seed. I have to dig around because it still has some roots on it too, but I have to dig around because if I just pull on it, I'll break the leaves off. So I dig around the roots and I flip out there a little orange dot. I'm not sure whether you guys can see that or not, but that's the seed. That's the edge of the seed that the onion grew out of. So the roots on that are much smaller. And that's what an onion field looks like about halfway through the life cycle. This is what we refer to as a green onion. So all of these, as they're standing upright, they're still green. Then as they start to die, the tops fold over. And the field looks awful at this point. It looks really nasty, but this is where we know that the onions are ready. So the onions actually start to grow out of the ground. The roots stay in, but the onion bulb actually starts to grow out. So here we are drying onions. So we've dug them. This is actually potato harvest, but it's very similar. And then that's a giant barn of onions. So the green onions, I'll go back a little bit here. The green onions that picture there, they're not quite ready to be harvested. So the biggest factor with onions is that you need to wait for those necks of the green part of the plant to fold over. So it folds over and it stops the onion from growing anymore. And once it gets to that point, we go through and we dig out the onions from the ground. And then we just put them on top of the ground. The machine actually digs them out and flips them up onto the dirt. But as it goes through the machine, it also cuts off those tops of the onions, that green and brown part. And then we leave them in the field for, depending on weather, it could be 2 weeks, sometimes longer, sometimes not as long, until those onions get really, really dry. And that outside skin, that nice brown skin gets nice and crisp. And once we get to that point where the onion is nice and crisp, then we'll go through with that harvester that was there. It's a very similar process to what we do for potatoes. And it picks up all the onions that are on the ground and puts them into those big trucks. And then we take the big trucks to our barn and we will put the onions in that massive storage. So that picture that had my face and all those onions behind it, that is one of our storages. We have 2, sometimes 3, depending on the harvest, filled with those types of onions. And then we will pick those onions up when we need them, when we get orders from grocery stores, and we'll put them through our packing line and pack them into bags that go to grocery stores. So the life of an onion is very different than the life of a herb, but it's very similar to a potato, which we're not going to get into today, but it's a very similar process, which is one of the reasons why we got into onions, because we could use some of our similar equipment that we have, our storage buildings. It was just an efficiency for us to try and find a crop that grows very similarly. Do we have any questions about onions? Oh, how many onions do you harvest in a season? Well, we pack our onions in 10-pound bags, and we roughly go through probably close to 10 to 15 million pounds of onions. So in a 10-pound bag of onions, there's about 20 to 25 onions in a bag. So when you put that over the lots and lots of onions that we do, I'm not sure that I know how to count that high to see how many individual onions we do. It's a lot. Do you grow different varieties? So yes, there's many different varieties within a variety, if that makes sense. So there's the onions that you guys know as yellow onions, which is mostly what we grow. There are red onions, which we grow a very few of those as well. There's Spanish onions, there's Vidalia onions, there's scallions, there's green onions. We don't grow any of those. But within each of those categories, there's multiple different types of varieties. So those particular varieties, so for us with our yellow onions, we grow about 5 or 6 different varieties of yellow onions. And we pick those varieties based on where we're going to plant them. So each type of seed has different characteristics with it. So it might be better in a wetter soil or a heavier soil, a clay versus a sand. If we expect the year to be very wet, then we might look for something that a type of seed that does well in a wet environment. If we expect the year to be very dry, then we'd look for an onion seed that does well in drought. So there's many different varieties. That taste-wise, they don't change at all. When you have yellow onions, all yellow onions basically taste the same. There's just varieties within those that grow differently. Oh, okay. So how big can an onion grow and how tall do the plants get? So the plants can get quite tall when they're growing. I would say that they're about maybe 18 inches, sometimes 2 feet, depending on how healthy the plant gets. If it's under stress because it's a very wet year, a very dry year, or maybe we've had a very windy year or hail, a lot of weather predicts kind of how the plants grow, but I've seen them grow up to 2 feet. And how big can they get? Well, when we plant our onions, you have to plant them with a certain space between the seeds. So if you think of that tiny little orange seed that we planted, when it starts to grow, it grows quite big. So you have to space those out to allow for that plant to grow. If we're looking to get really big onions, then we'll space them out further and add more water to them. The grocery stores give us specs as to what size of onions they want. So depending on what grocery store you go to, some might be bigger than others, and we will try and grow to that standard. Obviously, Mother Nature has a lot to do with that and whether we can actually get them to the size that they want. But you can get them up to 4 to 6 inches, depending on the variety, and as small as maybe an inch, inch and a half around. So they can grow in very, very different standards based on how you want to try and grow them yourselves. Oh, my favorite type of onion. I really like yellow onions. I put onions in everything. I cook with them. I like to cook with everything that's on my farm. So I like to use onions and dill and potatoes together. That's probably one of my favorite combinations of things to cook. I do use other onions, but definitely yellows are my favorite. They have the most sharp flavor of all the onions. What's my favorite crop to grow on my farm? Oh, that's a really good question. You know what? I'm not sure that I can actually answer that. I really enjoy potatoes because we have a long history with it and we kind of know what we're doing. But I really enjoy learning herbs and the onion plants. It's been 10 years, but every single year we learn something more about how it grows. And that's always really fun to me. So I think probably onions and herbs are my favorite. Oh, how many onions can fit into the storage? So we have 3 storages. Each of those storages will hold about 4 million pounds of onions. So about 12 million pounds we can hold at maximum. Oh, more than one variety of dill. So dill itself is basically the same, but it's similar to when I was talking about the onions. Dill is dill, but there are different varieties of dill that we can plant based on how we want to grow it. It is not as there's not as many varieties. I only know of maybe 3 or 4 that we grow, depending on where we're growing it. But they are it's a crop that they don't put a lot of science into because it's not a very high yielding crop, as well as a crop that not everybody uses. Potatoes and onions are used a lot more by a lot of different nationalities and people. Everybody uses onions and potatoes, or quite a lot. So there's a lot more research that goes into those types of crops to create different varieties where there isn't as much for dill and cilantro and fenugreek. How many workers do we have? So because we have so many different crops that we grow, each of them has a packing plant as well. So we have our herbs that we grow, we have onions that we grow, and we have potatoes that we grow. And now each of those all have a packing shed as well. So when the bulk of the season is happening and all three of those packing sheds are running and we're really, really busy, we can have up to about 75 workers on our farm. How long does it take to get onions to the stores, and do we sell to local stores? So yes, we sell to our local stores. Costco is one of our biggest retailers that we go to. So all of the Costco's in Ontario carry our onions. Our name brand in that store is Farmer's Table. Our potatoes and our onions go to Costco, and they cover, I think they're up to 40 stores in Ontario, maybe more, and a couple in Quebec that we sell to as well. And then some of the smaller, well, I don't want to say smaller retailers, some of the other retailers, Sobeys and Loblaws, they do have ours once in a while. We're not a regular seller of onions to them. And how long does it take? So from planting, if we plant an onion and harvest it, it's about 90 days to plant to harvest. And then from there, it can go directly to store after it's been harvested. But most of the time they get stored because we need to be able to keep that supply all year long. So they go into the storage in usually beginning of September. And then from September, we normally have our own onions till about April in storage, and we'll keep pulling from that storage and selling to the stores at that time. Just like anything else, though, if you store it for too long, the quality of that product starts to degrade. So we need to do more of a quality check on those particular onions to make sure that they're not breaking down and that they're still of the best quality that we can ship out. Just wondering when you're going to start planting other crops. So most of our planting is done for our onions and potatoes. They are for sure done. Our herbs, because it's such a short time frame, 30 to 45 days for herbs, we will replant the same soil a couple of times through the year. We do try other crops every once in a while. So when I was much younger and in grade school, we did cauliflower, cabbage, and broccoli were our other crops, and we didn't have herbs at that time. We've played around with growing all kinds of different things, just to learn and see what works with our system, our people, our land, and our facilities. So we're never opposed to learning, and as long as there is somebody willing to purchase it from us, we will try just about anything.
Okay, thanks, Nikki. I have time for one more question, and that one is, what is your favorite thing about being a farmer?
Oh, my favorite thing. Well, I left farming for a little while when I went away to school, and I thought that I didn't want to have anything to do with the farm when I left high school. And I spent about 10 years away from the farm and decided that I really missed my family. So I love working with my family every day. I love the technology that we get to use. And I love that we learn every day. Every day there's something new going on, and how you react to something that's happening. Some of the technology, I know we went through the onion video pretty quick, and but some of our tractors are self-driven tractors. So some of the technology that farms have is really, really cool. And that's some of the stuff that I get to play with every day. And those are probably my favorite things, the technology and the learning aspect of farming.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for a great tour, Nikki. It's definitely really important for everyone to know where their food comes from before it hits the store shelves. Thank you for celebrating Local Food Week, and we loved having you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And we'd like to remind everyone else to tune in throughout the rest of the week for the other tours that are happening in celebration of Local Food Week. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.